Heavy fighting has continued over the last 24 hours in the eastern Donetsk region. The Ukrainian military said on March 31, with Russia continuing to press against the destroyed town of Bakhmut, a focal point of attacks by Wagner mercenaries and Russian forces in the east, and also increasingly targeting Avdiivka, another Donetsk town. Russian strike forces continue to bombard military and infrastructure targets indiscriminately, causing damage and casualties among civilians. The war began with massive losses of tanks and armored vehicles for Russia. Videos captured tank columns being struck by anti-tank missiles and drones. Half of Russia's T-72 tanks, its most prevalent type, were destroyed based on the latest estimates. Some experts argued that tanks, which they said had been somewhat of a 20th century platform, were outmoded and susceptible to modern anti-tank weapons. Ukraine's top military commander, Valery Zaluzhny, said last week that the situation in and around Bakhmut, where Russian mercenaries from the private Wagner group led an assault on the town, had stable amid heavy losses suffered by Russian troops. A recent footage shows fighters from the 110th Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces destroying the reconnaissance company of the Russian invaders' 10th Tank Regiment. The video shows one tank and two Russian infantry fighting vehicles being destroyed. Video shows dramatic moment. The enemy was actively shelled by the Ukrainian drones, but most were lying near the destroyed vehicles and also in the trenches. It can be assumed that some of the attackers ran, but were crushed back by the Ukrainians. After a successful counterattack, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to regain control of a portion of the area along the E40 highway north of Bakhmut. In turn, domestic military expert and authorized frontline charter Deep State noted little progress by Russian interventionists on a small section of the front north of Bakhmut. The Ukrainian military has repeatedly shared online footage of Russian tanks being targeted, and many Western analysts say Russia has suffered heavy tank losses at Ukrainian hands during the war. Meanwhile, on the Russian side, in its daily report on Saturday, the Russian Defense Ministry said Ukraine had lost 8,399 tanks and other armored fighting vehicles since February 24, 2022. Last week, the Ukrainian military warned that Avdiivka could become a second Bakhmut, which has been reduced to rubble in what both sides called a meat grinder. Russia continues to attack Bakhmut, while Ukrainian troops repelled more than 60 attacks in the last 24 hours on the Eastern Front, some of which led to Avdiivka, Ukraine's general staff said Monday. The Ukrainian Air Force carried out 3 attacks on Russian troops, while missile and artillery units reportedly targeted command posts, 4 troop concentrations, weapons and military equipment, radio electronic equipment stations and ammunition depots. Meanwhile, a Ukrainian counteroffensive looks unlikely for several weeks, as troops from the Russian Wagner mercenary group bombard Bakhmut and draw ever closer to seizing control of the city. However, that effort cost a lot of manpower and resources, and now seems to have slowed down. Russian troops have launched more than 200 raids in the area in the last 24 hours alone, but are losing hundreds of people daily in their efforts. The Ukrainian armed forces managed to regain control of a portion of the area along the E40 highway north of Bakhmut. In turn, domestic military expert and authorized frontline charter Deep State noted little progress by Russian interventionists on a small section of the front north of Bakhmut. But in general, the situation in Bakhmut's direction has hardly changed, which of course is rather the defeat of the Russian aggressors, who are waging continuous attacks. Writing in its daily updates on Facebook, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine said 15 tanks had been destroyed, along with another 15 armored personnel carriers. Meanwhile, a Ukrainian counteroffensive looks unlikely for several weeks, as troops from the Russian Wagner mercenary group bombard Bakhmut and draw ever closer to seizing control of the city. However, that effort cost a lot of manpower and resources, and now seems to have slowed down. Russian troops have launched more than 200 raids in the area in the last 24 hours alone, but are losing hundreds of people daily in their efforts. The Russian airborne forces are playing a bigger role in the fighting around Bakhmut due to increasing losses to the private military company Wagner, the Ukrainian military says. Serhiy Chervedi, spokesman for the Eastern Armed Forces Group, told Ukrainian television Friday. Russian forces in the area conduct several dozen sorties every day. There were 32 exchanges of fire over the last day in and around Bakhmut, Chervedi said, adding that there were also airstrikes launched by fixed-wing aircraft and attack helicopters. Artillery is a much bigger influencing factor on military operations there than aviation, he said. On the other hand, the Ukrainian military quickly retracted earlier claims that Russian troops had withdrawn from the strategic town of Novokakhovka in Ukraine's southern Kherson region. The ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine proves that tanks are still vital in modern warfare. Tanks offer a combination of protection, mobility, and firepower that no other weapon can match. Both sides rely heavily on tanks in this war, and that's why the Ukrainians asked for more tanks from their allies, even old ones, while the Russians try to increase their production of new tanks and repair old ones from storage. The Ukrainian army used long-range and high-precision artillery systems to push back the Russian army in the Kharkiv region and make them retreat from the west bank of the Dnieper River in the Kherson region, leaving Kherson behind. However, HIMARS and CAESARs cannot provide enough fire support on the front line.